Hello, and welcome to WGBH Amplifies, the Bay State Banner. I'm your host, Ronald Mitchell, publisher and editor of New England's Bay State Banner News. And we are here today at the GBH studios in the Newsfeed Cafe in the main branch of Boston Public Library here in Copley Square. And we're here to celebrate Black History Month. Woohoo! Joining us today for our discussion is Dr. Noel Trent, President and CEO of the Museum of African American History, Boston and Nantucket. This is one of the national museums around the country whose funding was cut and then restored at the beginning of this current administration. So she's going to share some of the history of that challenge and the struggle and the fight to get those funds restored. Our next guest is Byron Rushing. He was a state representative here in Massachusetts for 36 years. And he's the former president of the Museum of African American History. And he is a national treasure for all of you who don't know. He has been instrumental in the creation of many Black history monuments throughout our state and country, and has some deep insight as to the history of the creation of Black History Month. So he's going to share some of that with us as well. To my left is Lamerchi Frazier. Lamerchi is a visual artist and public historian, educator, who currently serves as the executive director and creative strategist for planning for Spoke Artists. She is one of our nation's most prominent Black artists. Her pieces are in the collection of many top museums around the world, including but not limited to the ICA, Institute of Contemporary Art here in Boston, the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., the White House Permanent Collection, as well as the Peabody Essex Museum here in Massachusetts, and many others around the world. And to our far left, joining us from the state of New Hampshire, just north of Massachusetts, is Jerry Ann Bogus, Executive Director of the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire. New Hampshire, as I mentioned, is our neighbor to the north, and New Hampshire is also considered as one of the whitest states in America. But like all states in America, it has a rich Black American history, and she's going to share some of that rich history with us today. So I want to thank all of you for joining us as we talk today about and celebrate Black history. So thank you. And I also want to thank our live audience for joining us as well. Thank you for being here. So I want to start off by talking about the legacy of Black history. Black American history has left us a legacy worth recalling every day of the year. And this year, as we celebrate the 250th anniversary of the founding of America, we must remember the sacrifice of the first well-known casualty of the fight for our nation's freedom from colonialism. He was a formerly enslaved man named Crispus Attucks. He was killed no more than a mile from here in an event that we refer to as the Boston Massacre. This was the first battle in our nation's fight for independence. And the fact that the first casualty was a Black man should illustrate to everyone that Black American history has been American history since before America was America. And no effort to erase that is going to succeed. 100 years after Carter G. Woodson planted the seeds of Black History Month, 100 years after Carter G. Woodson planted the seeds of what now has become Black History Month, our country is caught up in another civil conflict, one that is animated by racism and repression. This time, the author of the racism and animus occupies the highest office in the land. And the litany of offenses by President Trump and his administration is long. But no few surpass his blatant racism in his social posts depicting former President Barack Obama and his wife Michelle as apes. Trump took the post down after a relatively bipartisan outcry, but he has failed to apologize for this deeply offensive image. The assaults on our Black history is part of Trump's obsession with dismantling diversity, equity, and inclusion in every level of our society, from college admission to minority hiring to public contracts to voting rights. Today we're going to share some of that history that they are trying to hide from America, and we're going to share it with everybody so that we can all understand how we as Americans can celebrate this wonderful heritage that we have known as Black American history. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
And for joining me in this wonderful conversation. And I want to start off with you, Dr. Trent.
Okay.
Our first question will go to you. As head of the Museum of African American History, Boston and Nantucket, please share with us your reaction when you were notified around a year ago about the museum's funding being cut and then the subsequent struggles to get it
Well, thank you so much for that question, Ron. And I think what's important for people to know in this month that is Black History Month, that Black museums play a critical role in preserving that history. We are organizations that are very scrappy. We have started out of grassroots community efforts. There's no wealthy donor that just decides to put their stuff on. This is people who care about the museums, who collect, who come together, pull neighbors together to make something happen. And so we're a critical part of that preservation story and making sure American history is available. In about April of last year, we received a notice that our funding from the Institute of Museum and Library Services was cut. And in the letter, they said something along the lines of, our work is no longer in the interest of the United States and the IMLS program, to which we took great disagreement with. We had about 30 days to submit a repeal or appeal for that. We did do that, and then about a month later, 30 days later, there was an injunction filed in a federal court in Rhode Island that prevented our funding from being withdrawn. And in the months since then, the funding has fully been returned. But for us, as soon as that letter happened, we started activating our community. We started telling people what was happening, how this was part of a systemic erasure, and that we will not be erased. We refuse to do that. And so our existence was predicated on the support of our community. And so we really went out and appealed to folks and let people know what was happening. I firmly believe that had we not said anything, there would have been an impression that things were okay. And things are not okay. And even with the funding coming back, there are still implications from executive policies that are still affecting us even in this moment.
So can you share with us some of the funding shortfalls that you're facing?
Well, in general, there's an initiative to reduce Black history in the public sphere. And so, for instance, the Executive Order for Truth and Sanity in American History, it specifically targets the Smithsonian and the National Park Service, who have both begun to make changes to their panels. But the implication is that they could go into private museums. What does that look like for us? Immediately in January of last year, as these executive orders were coming out to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and implying that you would not get your federal contracts paid, well, then people started to change how they do business. When you change how you do business, all of a sudden the employee resource groups aren't booking tours with us. Some of the speaking engagements we used to have weren't happening. So by last February, and I really don't fault businesses because there were so many different things happening at once that people were trying to navigate a very complicated space, we saw an 80% drop in our revenue, right? There was a very tangible effect on us. Now, we have seen people step up for us in major ways. People who have supported us for years have continued to support us and called us and said, hey, this is unfair, we're standing behind you. But it has been quite the challenge in this particular moment.
Well, thank you for hanging in there and fighting the good fight for us. We really appreciate what you guys do at the museum.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to move on to my next question is to our national treasure, Byron Rushing. Byron, I understand that you have some great insight on the origins of Black History Month. So can you share with us that story and how Carter G. Woodson's developed what was Black History Week? Well, I'll let you tell the story because I don't want to.
So, Ron, I want to first begin by really praising you and the banner for reminding all of us of the centennial.
Thank you.
You even reminded me of the centennial. So, Black History Month began 100 years ago as an idea from a number of Black historians who had started off forming an association for the study of Negro life and history. And they began by publishing a scholarly journal. And it was an interesting journal that still comes out today. It was a scholarly, with all the footnotes, historian's journal. But it was started to tell the story of Black history, but it was also started so that Black historians would have a place to publish, because no white historical journal would publish Black authors. It got to a point that white scholars of Black history found that the only place they could publish was in the Journal of Negro History. Now, of course, the schools, public schools, were segregated then, all through the South and a good chunk of the North. And those teachers were reading this journal, and they come to Woodson and they say, look, we can't use this journal in our 6th grade. You have to have a more popular way of talking about this history. And that's where he got the idea to have a week,
a celebration of this history.
That's right, and it was called Negro History Week. And he chose a week in February.
Frederick Douglass's birthday.
That's right. But you got to understand this, and I just learned this from reading a little more about Carter G. Woodson. We always knew that Negro History Week almost always had 2 birthdays in it. They had February 12th. Whose birthday was that?
Frederick Douglass.
Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, Abraham Lincoln. I'm sorry, the 12th. Exactly.
Yeah, that's because you're so young. Those of us who are old remember when February 12th was a holiday.
Oh, yes.
We got off school twice in February. Once for Lincoln and once for Washington at the end of the month, right? President's Day is a silly invention to cut one holiday out, but also force us to be celebrating presidents that don't need any celebration, who really should never be president. But anyway, to get back to this,
so how did
it turns out that Black people were already celebrating those 2 days. So he picked a day that already had a constituency of Black people. Of course, all of you know about Lift Every Voice. What the nickname was the Negro National Anthem. That was written by, in 1900 by James Weldon Johnson, right? And it was celebrated because they were celebrating Lincoln's birthday in 1900 in Florida.
And that's how he came up with, he wrote that wonderful
That's right, and he wrote this because he had invited Booker T. Washington to come to his school in Florida, his high school in Florida, to speak to the students, and he wanted to have the students do something really snazzy.
So that's
Booker
why
T.
he wrote
Washington.
this wonderful.
That's right.
Now, really quickly though, because I do want to talk to some more. I would like you to share with us how it went from Negro History Week to Black History.
Well,
when did the name of it change?
First, it changed to being a month.
Right.
Right, and then.
So it was Negro History Month.
That's right, and then during the late 50s, early 60s, there was a shift in the decision among many Black leaders that the name Negro should be changed, that the name Negro didn't commemorate the greatness of Black people, and that we should call ourselves Black or African American. I always believe that, but we should always understand that when I talk about Martin Luther King, I always call him a Negro, because he called himself.
That's what we all called ourselves at that time. Right. Yes, yes. Well, thank you so much for that. Lamerchi?
Yes.
You're coming your way. Now, as I mentioned in your introduction, you are a wonderful artist, and you share African American history through various different forms of your art. Yeah. Can you share with us why you choose to present African American history through your art and why you feel that's so important?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to talk about that, because in our archival protection of the history, we have documents that are written in black and white that tell us stories, that give evidence of the history and where we've been. There are ways of seeing that in addition to that black and white document, we have art as document. It's in its visual language and presentation that many conversations are able to be had. So in the period that Byron has just mentioned, we speak to an era that has just come up from the Harlem Renaissance, and the commitment of Black artists in many different genres to speak to the culture and the history of African Americans that were called at that time, to bring forward the power of art in telling our story. It was a very important time. And Alain Locke, who wrote The New Negro, spoke to many of those who we now call the talented 10th to use that philosophy to advance the race, to speak to what might not be available otherwise. And so as the advance of the Harlem Renaissance goes on to embrace the visual works of Aaron Douglas, to then give way to Jacob Lawrence, to give way to many of the people who we revere now as our national treasures in Black art and creating the Black aesthetic, we can go forward to embrace what happens during the era of Black power, to even more amplify our story in a radical movement. So the movements from the Harlem Renaissance through the next period of civil rights and into the Black Power era give us this visual history that moves in time and has now given us the opportunity to look at the 100th anniversary of Black History Month and participate with people and have these discussions of the material that they bring to the art. And now we have the opportunity to look at the works of people who have worked in collectives like Romy Bearden, who created Spiral, that was a collective of art and written genres in art, like poetry. The agreement of collective groups like Obasi, Wiusi, Afrocobra. This represents an advance of visual acumen and visual presentation that can't be done otherwise.
But explain to us why, and I understand, but explain to us why utilizing art to tell history and to encourage people to embrace other cultures is so powerful. Share with us how that tool's power and strength is utilized.
Okay, I think of art as document, as bringing issue forward to help others visualize and see. It's a way of seeing. It helps us to have this, what I call a soft landing for hard issue that might not be able to be evidenced otherwise, to bring out those hidden stories, to have iconic places, iconic people represented on these canvases, in our sculptures, in our monuments.
Our artists immortalized our culture and our people in an opportunity to present it to the world when it was otherwise not being presented.
Yes, when it was not being presented.
And it was also allowed a platform and a way to bring up difficult issues that otherwise would have been not allowed to be shown.
And these organizations like the National Conference of Artists were the strategies for elevating this art as a national platform for the race were given the academic backing, and people like Elizabeth Catlett, a renowned artist, in 1963 tells us you must have your own museums, your own galleries, your own places of representing your art that gave way to museums like the Museum of African American History, not only having documents, but having visual evidence of our work. And the creation of museums like the DuSable in Chicago, it gave rise to these places where we could best represent ourselves.
Well, thank you for that insight. I really appreciate that. Okay. So now our last guest on our panel, we haven't talked to you yet, is Jerry Bogus. And Jerry, you run and created, as I understand it, the New Hampshire Black History Month, the New Hampshire Black History Trail.
Black Heritage Trail.
Now, I have grown up in Greater Boston my whole life. I do frequent New Hampshire for winter sports and summer sports sometimes, I have to say. And up until a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I was not even aware this existed. In fact, the general view amongst many around this country is that New Hampshire is one of the whitest states in the Union, one of the smallest populations of African American people. But obviously, as is true with every state in this Union, it has a very rich Black history. So share with us what motivated you to create this trail and some of the wonderful monuments you have on it.
So I'll tell you a little bit. The trail, the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire, started out as the Portsmouth Black Heritage Trail. And it's 31 years old, and it started by the work of one person, one woman, Valerie Cunningham. She started at a very young age when she was 12 or 13 in her hometown of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, wanting to see herself in her town, because there was she wasn't represented in any books, there wasn't any signs, any monuments, nothing. And she started researching New Hampshire's Black history and in her hometown. And that led to 25 markers in Portsmouth that told the history of New Hampshire. And she brought me along much later to help her with this work. And we were going through what she had and saw that her research extended way beyond Portsmouth to all of New Hampshire. And so we started and formed the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire, the statewide organization, with the help of some very good friends that formed the organization.
Just really quickly, can you tell us the significance of Portsmouth to New Hampshire? I know it's a port town, and it had a very large Black population at one point in time, or a larger than normal for New Hampshire?
Larger than normal for New Hampshire.
Larger than normal.
But being the only port city and being the oldest in our state, what people don't know about Portsmouth is that it was involved in the transatlantic slave trade. So outside of Massachusetts and Rhode Island, we were the largest partners in this trade. Mm-hmm. We were the shipbuilders. We had all the forests, so we had the trees. We had the merchants. We were insuring the ships. We had the whole institution
of the whole industry
of industry.
The whole industry.
And so people always think of New Hampshire as the whitest. Doesn't mean that there is no Black history, but that was the solid. We were definitely, because New Hampshire didn't have a tax too, people could bring their enslaved, the people they wanted to enslave, once they brought them to our port, bring them to New Hampshire, because your property was then taxed. So in New Hampshire, they didn't have to tax the enslaved. But yeah, that's how we started.
What are some of the most prominent monuments that you share and educate folks about?
Again, New Hampshire, because we haven't shared the story that much, has a lot of firsts in Black history. And we're in the news right now for one of the important Black history stories, the story of Ona Marie Judge, who escapes. She goes for her own freedom. She leaves George and Martha Washington, the President's house in Philadelphia, and makes her way through the Black abolitionists in Philadelphia. She gets on a ship and ends up in Portsmouth, where she lives the rest of her life. Her story was recently just erased from the monuments in Philadelphia by the current administration, I think because it showed George Washington in a unfavorable light, that he was a slave owner,
and wanted his property back.
He wanted his property back, and he sent, on many occasions, he tried to get her by any means necessary to get her back. Yeah, his property.
As he viewed it, yes.
So we tell the Ona Marie Judge story in Portsmouth, and we're going to have her mural on our building, and it's one of the projects we're working on now to make sure that everybody can have access to that story that we're erasing on a national level. We also have the first black man to be elected to public office, Wentworth Cheswell, the first black woman to publish a novel in English, Harriet Wilson, the first internationally known entertainer, Richard Potter, the magician Richard Potter, the signer of the 1779 petition, Prince Whipple, who was enslaved to one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. But the 1779 petition is one of those really very significant written documents by enslaved Africans in our country. He was one of the main signers. But there's a line in it that the scholars are really exploring right now as the first reference in any public document of this phrase, the dignity of the human spirit, why we should not have enslavement. So we have those. Those are just 5 really powerful stories.
Yeah, that is amazing.
In New Hampshire.
In New Hampshire. That is a thank you.
And I think it's important to understand that Africans came here, were brought here, right, only by ships, right? They didn't fly here.
Yeah.
And so that means that almost all the Africans who came to North America came to port cities.
Yes.
And what is almost impossible to find is a port city along the East Coast that no Africans came to.
Yeah. Or that doesn't have a rich...
And it doesn't matter how far north or how far south
you go.
Right.
All right, there's a very strong black...
And I would add to that they didn't only come as enslaved people, because Africans were trading with Native Americans before colonial times.
Yep.
That's true.
Yep.
Yeah.
Not up here.
Yeah.
South. Yep.
And that's part of the history of our country and the Prince Hall story, the founder of the Prince Hall Masons, and him being a
Yes.
freed man prior to the creation of the country, and the value of him and his compatriots becoming Masons, which basically was a way to identify the value or establish themselves as equal to all white men, because they could be Masons, and it was a great tale as to how.
Yeah, I also believe that it was the only secret organization that black people could have that white people would consider okay.
Well, that's probably true as well. Dr. Trent, I want to talk with you about your museum has very wonderful stories, like Jerry Ann Bogus. Talk to us about some of the wonderful history of your museum and how you share that with our community.
Well, what's great about our site here in Boston is that we steward 2 historic buildings. The African Meeting House of Boston, which is the oldest existing black church building in the country. There were older church buildings at one point. However, what we tend to see happen in black communities is through urban renewal, building of highways, those buildings are frequently decimated. So it is nothing short of a miracle that the building is still there. Adjacent to that building is the A.B.O. Smith School, which was built in 1835. It is the oldest existing black church building. It is the oldest public school built specifically for black students. Both of them have very significant roles in American history. So the African Meeting House, it is the gathering place for one of the first black abolitionist groups in the country, the Massachusetts Colored Association. And then in 1832, William Lloyd Garrison, who could have started his anti-slavery movement anywhere, actually starts that in that building. And so when you go into the sanctuary of the African Meeting House, what is palpable when you walk in there is the power of the place. The floorboards that you walk on are over 200 years old. And I encourage people not to think about the notable people. We know Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison and Maria Stewart all spoke there. But it's the everyday folks, the people who were the residents of the northern slope of Beacon Hill, which was Boston's black community at the time, who had very little disposable time. They had very little disposable money, but they were dedicated to coming to the meeting house, supporting the abolitionist movement, supporting the end of slavery for a future they would not see. But they had an idea of what the possibilities could be. And that's embedded in the very essence of that building. Across the street, the Smith School has a storied history as well. It's tied to education equity in this country. Schools for black students in Boston, we brag about having the first public school, but black students were not allowed to attend the public school. So Prince Hall and his son Primus Hall started educating black kids in Beacon Hill in people's homes. And they kind of would go from home to home. Then there got to be too many kids. Too many kids need an education. Where are you going to go? So they end up going into the basement of the Smith School. But there's this idea that we need a school. So a very wealthy gentleman, Abiel Smith, passes away, leaves $1,500 to the city of Boston for the education of black students. And so they build this school. But it remains controversial. It's under-resourced, there's not enough staffing, there's not enough room. And in 1850, there's a father in North End named, is the father of a young girl named Sarah Roberts. And she's like 5 years old, and he's like, my daughter is not gonna walk from the North End to Beacon Hill. I've walked from the North End to Beacon Hill. I don't recommend it for a 5-year-old a day, right? There's no way in the 19th century you're getting a 4 or 5-year-old to do that. So he takes this case to court, and it ends up going to the Massachusetts Supreme Court. They lose the case, but about 100 years later, as a group of Howard University graduates, you know I'm going to put that. It just fits.
It just fits.
A group of Howard University law students and graduates are with Charles Hamilton Houston, and they're putting together a case to test education equity in this country. They cite that case as one of the cases that was a historical wrong, and that this case, Brown versus Board of Education, should correct. So we're embedded in this history of America. And so what we do at the museum today, we have great exhibitions. We are working to elevate stories of black people, especially prior to the 20th century. So right now we have an exhibition up on Black Voices of the Revolution because we feel like people have neglected the African American perspective. We often say they were inspired by the words of John Hancock and John Adams. That might be true to a point, but we're also denying the intellectual capability of that community. What happens when we position Boston's black community at the time of the revolution as having just as many compelling dialogues about freedom, about citizenship, about the British Crown infringing on their rights? They are just as affected, if not more, by some of these acts and the embargoes. What happens when we say they had a right to think about this, and they were, but it wasn't necessarily contingent on white thought? When we position them differently, we give them agency in their lives, and that's part of the work that we're doing. And then we have fun ways of making the history more accessible. So we have a Frederick Douglass AI in the sanctuary. It's a closed database, so nobody can just shove stuff in. It is literally just Frederick Douglass's 3 autobiographies and selected speeches. And so visitors can come, they can ask Douglass a question, and with the algorithm, he will answer. And it's a great way for people to interact with someone as prolific as Douglass and find answers to your questions. Now, he can't answer all questions, so people have asked him questions about Kendrick Lamar. But sometimes the algorithm will spit out a good answer, like music is important, and I think it's a great expression, and everyone should enjoy music, or your representation in Congress is important. It's important that everybody has a voice in our civics, in our democracy. I was like, wow, I didn't expect that. So those are the ways that we continue to look at making it accessible. But we're also working to push the envelope on our perception of the capabilities and the intellectual thought within Boston's black community.
Well, that is a wonderful, wonderful insight. And I think that it is something that I was going to talk about in my closing monologue. The heritage and history of Black America gives us the tools to address the challenges we face. And I think the reason why the current administration is pushing so hard to erase that history is because they want to erase the tools that can lead to our growth and our success against the autocratic and fascism that's rising in our country. I think that is the template for our success looking back in our history. And if you remove that history, then us as the masses may lose our understanding of our own power and our ability to continually create progress in this country.
Yeah, Black history is absolutely viewed as a threat, right? But here's the one thing that I want to make sure that we position well, is that this erasure is happening, or attempts at erasure, is happening from outside of our community. But let me be clear, historically, we have never waited for permission to write our history, to preserve our history. It started with George Washington Williams, who said, let me tell you who and how they participated in the American Revolution, and William Cooper Lettell, both Boston residents at the time that they were writing. We never waited. We found the resources, and some of these are publicly accessible documents. So we have been creative, and when they said your artistic aesthetic isn't valuable, we said, you've lost your mind, and we're going to celebrate our artists anyway, right? We have integrated, as we learned about Egypt and West Africa, I mean, all you have to do is look at any of Lamertie's pieces, and she has incorporated iconography from across the diaspora in her work. That is her rejecting a European notion to a more African-based notion and celebration of the diaspora. We do not have to wait for permission for folks to continue to preserve and tell our story. Gee, it's nice. And it's great when the governments recognize it and support it. And we welcome that recognition and support. But if you pull your interest, guess what? I'm still operating today.
That's right.
You know what?
Yep.
If
And
you pull your interest,
told.
we're going to still do this work.
That's
And
right.
I feel like I have a responsibility, and all of us have a responsibility and obligation, and he hates when I do this, but I'm doing it anyway, because of the work of Byron. It is an incredible, no, I'm serious, it's an incredible honor for me to sit next to this man, because what people don't understand is, him from his work in Boston and his work in the State House, but in 1978, he and Dr. Barry Gaither gathered with other Black professionals, museum folks, to say, we have a bunch of Black museums. We need to talk to each other. How can we make sure that we're not just a flash in the pan? How can we make sure that we stay? How can we make sure that we train the next generation? They form an organization that becomes known today as the Association of African American Museums. With that organization, I am not in this seat. So I have an obligation to Byron, to John Kennard, to Faith Davis Rushing, to Margaret Burroughs, who founded the DuSable Museum, to Charles Wright, who founded the International Afro-American Museum, now known as the Wright Museum in Detroit, to keep up this work, because none of them waited for permission to do this work. And it's great when we have the support, but we got to keep doing this work anyway.
Yes, amen to that. Amen to that. And that's a perfect transition, because my next question was to you, Byron, about the wonderful monuments that you have helped to create throughout our city. And she just explained one of the most powerful ones wasn't even a monument, but it was the organization that gave the strength to create. So talk to us about...
I just want to point out that the first meetings that when we were thinking about doing this were held at Association of Negro Life and History conventions. So we were always there going to them, and we got together and said we needed to organize the Black museums in the country.
In the country, that's wonderful.
Right.
Talk to us about
I don't want people to think that I put up these monuments.
No,
See,
you were
my
instrumental
job
in
was to
helping
interpret the monuments. And sometimes I was successful and sometimes I was not. Because I
But
still
weren't
believe...
you instrumental in the Harriet Tubman
that-
exhibit and the Harriet Tubman monument?
Oh, yes.
On
yes.
Columbus Ave? Talk
Yes.
to us a little bit about that and the creation of that.
So the decision in the South End was Harriet Tubman, of course, was well known in the South End to Black people because of an institution that was started by Black women in the South End to help young Black women who were coming to Boston to both work from the South, to both work and a few to go to school. And they wanted to name that institution after somebody famous and they decided to name it after Harriet Tubman. And so they, at one point, they realized they should ask Harriet Tubman for permission, but they could never connect with her until Harriet Tubman came to Boston. And I don't know if many people know this, but in her later years, Harriet Tubman became one of the largest anti-alcohol people in the United States.
Okay.
And so she was here for a temperance meeting in Boston. They had invited her to speak, and so the black women went to that temperance meeting, and they met Harriet Tubman, most of them for the first time, and they asked permission to name the house after her. And so Harriet Tubman House was well known in the South End, and it should still be there. And if anybody here wants to help me, I want to buy it back.
Okay, all right. Well, that's
it should
where
not be condos.
Yeah. And there's also a wonderful bronze monument as well.
That's right. And so at one point, some people came to me and said, "Do you realize that there is no monument on city-owned land to a woman?" Right? The only women in this city were on state-owned land, and one of them had been hanged, and the other one had been banished, and from colonial Boston, and so. And they said, what did they think of having that first woman monument be in the South End? And I said it was a great idea. I saw them looking at me, and I said, if you really want to do this well, you need to get hold of Frida Garcia, who then ran the United South End Settlements. And I think she could get it done for you. And so I helped them, and we were able to have this monument done and commissioned for the park. And if there's anyone here who has not been there, it's on Columbus and West Newton. And
it is a beautiful life-size monument.
Yes.
Depicting Harriet Tubman and other freed.
By Fern Cunningham.
Yeah. Wonderful piece.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that story. Lamerci, talk to us about some of your pieces and how you utilize them to educate folks. Some of the stuff that you're most proud of.
One of the things I want to say before I talk about my work is my agreement with Noelle and the stories that she was bringing and Byron, because without that foundation, artists like me cannot even exist. When we talk about black art, it has been with us from the beginnings. As we cross the Middle Passage into Boston, we have been creating a visual language. And so to honor what is in the park on Columbus, we think about artists who are the precursors, women artists, particularly Edmonia Lewis, who is in the 1860s here in Boston, and then expatriates to Italy, does her work as a sculptor, and the Museum of African American History has her bust of Robert Gould Shaw.
Right.
We also have...
That's a separate story.
That's a whole... We could go forever.
Well, it's not there right now. It's on loan. It's on display at the Peabody Essex Museum.
Really?
A retrospective on Ammonia Lewis. That's going to be up for, I think, about a year.
Wonderful.
Tremendous.
What do you
And her work leads other sculptors who, in the times that they were sculpting, this was not a position or a career for women that was really respected. So Meta Ward Fuller at the other end of the park that Byron just talked about is speaking on issues like emancipation and showing the enslaved Africans walking out on their own fate, accepting what they want to do. So this permission, as you so well elaborated on, is a part of our DNA.
Or not asking for permission.
Not asking for permission.
But
And
just
so
doing what
in
we
that
must do.
tradition, when we talk about Phyllis Wheatley's volume of various poems on various subjects, religions, and moral, we have Cypriot Moorhead, who has created this image of Phyllis Wheatley that we now have privilege to, because he could bring the visual. And it is the first instance that I think in a published volume we have black art available in this country. So in that tradition, artists like myself are working on this continuum that gives way to, in the 1960s, the walls of respect that are erected in Chicago and Detroit that speak to our need to be community liberated as a collective of people.
Now, I want to ask you an important question. For those art teachers out there and for the educators out there who are watching, where can they go to find this wonderful history that you're talking about? Or what are some of the resources that you might refer them to, or some of the things that some of the places they might look to help educate themselves? Because you're informing me of things that I didn't even know, and I own a newspaper, so I try to be educated.
There are numerous volumes about the black aesthetic, and fortunately now that we have, that go back into the Harlem Renaissance and even further. Even William Wells Brown, when he traveled to Europe, took placards of black art to Europe to expose what we were in the 19th century, how we thought. So if you want to look at volumes that will give you some sense of this story as a continuum, you can look at some of the works that have been written by African American art historians who tell us, like Richard Powell, who is from Duke University, who wrote on black art and culture in the 20th century, and his work is phenomenal for understanding the philosophic underpinnings of
not just the
work,
physical history, but the philosophical background that helped to develop these artists and what they utilize to motivate them to create
yes,
this.
that speak to our diasporic advance of the visual, from philosophers like Frantz Fanon, who talks about our darkness and how did we then emerge without lack, without not having enough to say or not respected. So that was one of the most important books to me, that when I taught African American art history, that I would admonish my students to look at. When we talk about black feminist sectors of art, there are many books that they can look in. And so I would actually speak to different categories, different genres of art. But when we talk about people who have written on the Harlem Renaissance, you can take any period that we participate in, and we have from the 1600s forward, and even before we had landed here, to look at as a period to research. And you will find your way. You'll find what resonates to you and what you want to present as a teacher in art. But in my work, what I like to highlight is that I've had many mentors. People like Richard Yard, Lois Mailou Jones, Elizabeth Catlett, Benny Andrews, and places that I found them were in the museums. The Museum of the National Center of African American Artists, right here on Walnut Street, is a repository of over 3,500 pieces of art from the diaspora that give us a connection to the artists authentically, who are painting, who are doing metal work, who are crafting their and honing their skills, that are now collected in a place where you can see them. And we have to give full credit to Elma Lewis, who created the School of Fine Arts, and then allowed us to have the leadership of M. Barry Gaither, who she hired to then run for over 50 years.
The museum.
The museum.
Another wonderful
the museum.
resource.
So I just say, use your books, use your places and spaces that we occupy for your education. And I'm continuously doing that all the time. I do want to highlight, before I finish, that we have Say It Loud, an exhibition now featured at the Institute of Contemporary Art that highlights AMARP, African American Master Artist in Residency program, founded by Dr. Dana Chandler, that highlights many of the artists that I was speaking about, but it gives us the opportunity to look at this continuum of 50 years also.
And this is at
Black art.
This is at the Institute of Contemporary Art.
Yes, and
here
it's
in
now
Boston.
open February 12th through August.
Wonderful.
2026.
Wonderful. Well, we are here live in the Newsfeed Cafe in the main branch of the Boston Public Library. And as a result of that, we have a live audience. So we have a couple questions from our audience for our esteemed panel.
Is this on? Yes. So can you hear me?
A little louder?
Can't hear me yet? How about that?
Okay.
Is that better? Okay. There we go. Thank you, Maddie. So a couple of audience members had some questions, so I want to share them with you. Jerry Ann, I think this one is for you. They talk about they've spent time in New Hampshire, and can you talk about Mary Bethune-Cookman? She is their idol in New Hampshire. There's a campground with cottages in her name. And her will says it all. So just didn't know if you wanted to share any more about that. So that's the first question. Let me get to the second one, which is for all of you.
Okay.
So think about this as Jerry Ann's talking there. So for each speaker, including the host, so do you see young people interacting with Black history today, and what can we do better to continue their interest and knowledge? Thank you.
Okay. Well, Jerry Ann, why don't you take the first
So the
question?
first one, I'm going to pass it because I don't know that much, but I know my best friend here does.
Oh, my.
But I did want to acknowledge two New Hampshire people that were kind of mentioned here a little bit, alluded to. Thomas Paul from the Meeting House, Boston Meeting House. He was one of the founder of the Meeting House. Mm-hmm. He's a New Hampshire son, born and raised, came to Boston, and was the first pastor for the Meeting House. And you mentioned Fern Cunningham from Boston, who did the first statue that honored a person of color in New Hampshire, the Harriet Wilson statue. So she was the sculptor for that.
Right.
So just wanted to shout New Hampshire out,
Okay.
and that connection with Boston. And I'll pass that on to you.
I just wanted to briefly say some comments about Mary McLeod Bethune. She is a revered person in my family. She was a friend of my grandmother. And she was the founder of Bethune-Cookman College, which is located in Daytona, Florida, where I grew up. And I went to that school in every summer in my education, my high school life. But importantly, she was one who understood the actual actions of women and what they could produce. She understood that principle of each one teach one. She understood how we had to do for our own selves. And through the Negro women's movement, she was able to muster support. I am not aware of the year that she moved or had this cottage in New Hampshire, but she was dedicated to the fine education of what we could be as Black people. She underscored that we could make for ourselves what we needed. And so she then is one of the founders of what we call the HBCUs that still remains active today. You can go on that campus and see an actual mannequin of her and the preservation of her home on that campus. So she was a mover and a shaker beyond what we can imagine women in her day being able to establish this. And it became very apparent to me when I was in Brazil at the Stephen Biko Foundation. The question was, how did African Americans create colleges? And so she is one of those people that we can look to her story and find out.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Jerry, and I wanted to give you a chance to answer the second question, which is how do you see us sharing our Black history with the younger folks in our community?
So what we do in New Hampshire, we create these spaces for young people to gather through tours. And especially in their neighborhood, in their own towns, if they are connected to the history in their own town, they get excited. I didn't know this. And it opens up that space for the dialogue. How did I not know it? And then what else do I not know about my space? So our tours are one of the things that we do with young kids. We started a new AR, augmented reality project, where everybody's on their phone these days, so they can go to a site. We started off with the African Burying Ground in Portsmouth, which is was built over, covered off, and it's now a memorial park. So they can go with their phone, they can go there and they hear the story of enslavement, they'll hear about Prince Whipple, they'll hear how the monument came to be, how we reinterred the remains of the Africans that were unearthed during regular road construction, and what that all means. So it opens up the space for
So
dialogue.
it really gets them to understand that it's right in their neighborhood, it's in their community,
Yeah.
it's their history too.
As,
We are-
just as a friend of mine would always, I'd have to bring Napoleon. Space is the place.
There you go. Our time is running short, but Dr. Trent, I wanted to give you a chance to answer that question as well, because I know your museum, as well as the AI, the hologram of Frederick
the
Douglass.
AI Frederick Douglass is a key way. We are part of Boston Family Days, so we have specific activities for different age groups every month. But the other thing that we do in our work, we do scavenger hunts, and we also just encourage people to encounter the history that feels authentic to them from our exhibitions. But as we talk to students, one of the things I say is remember that museums are spaces you belong in. Whether it's my museum or another museum, it's okay for you to be there. And it's okay for you to agree with what's on the wall, and it's okay for you to disagree. And so it's important for us that we empower them to have some sort of agency in their visit, especially with artwork, to make sure that they know they can like it or dislike it, but have a reason for it, and continue to go and to continue to learn.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, so I'll give you the last word.
Ask the question. If you don't know, no, because you have to ask the question. Every town in Massachusetts has had black people in it, and most of them have a few, if not a lot, still in it. And so ask the question of what was the first black person in my town or city. It's not just 1619 and the whole country. Every city and town has a first black person. Find them.
Thank you so much. So today, as we close in our celebration of Black History Month, Black History Month calls us to remember achievements in art and culture, politics and the pulpit, science and business, and in every arena of human life. In this moment of heightened stress on the very idea of what America means, in the active attacks on the American experiment we call democracy, I want to remind everyone that one of the most important lessons that history teaches us. This is the very lesson that all this effort to erase Black history is trying to get us to forget. The true fact that no matter what the difficult challenges ahead, within our history holds the tools to move our nation forward and to achieve a better country for all of us. Through the actions of our ancestors, through they worked together, they stood for justice, they planned, they strategized in the face of horrific racial violence, and they moved our country forward. We are the only thing that can change the course of our nation, and we do that through we are the only tool that can move our nation forward, and we do that by using the tools that we learn from our history. History is important, and we must continue to cherish it. So I want to thank all of our guests for being here. Dr. Noel Trent, our national treasure, as all of these guests are, Byron Rushing, Lamerty Frazier, Jerry Ann Bogus. I also want to thank our wonderful GBH production staff, Juan Jose Zanedas, Hannah Eckhart, Maggie Girard, and Stephen Brackus. I want to thank our wonderful producers, Sandra Lopez Burke and Lauren Herbert. I am your host, Ronald Mitchell, editor and publisher of New England's Bay State Banner News. And I want to also thank my wonderful Bay State Banner staff for helping us to put all of these wonderful programs together. We are here on March 12th with our next program, which will focus on community sports and the importance of all of us working together for our young people. So I want to thank you for joining us here on GBH Amplifies the Bay State Banner. Thank you.